We're in Daniel 9. We'll be picking up in verse 13 here in just a few minutes. All right, so we're in the midst of Daniel confessing his sins and the sins of his people. And then we are given a vision that is extremely difficult. So, you remember verses 1 and 2. We won't go back and read all of it. 1 and 2, he's been contemplating Jeremiah's words that the captivity would last 70 years, and that's led him to think about what is going to come next. And then he moves in and begins to pray for his people and confessing their sins. And I do want to begin reading in 3 and refresh ourselves to what he's been saying. You remember we talked about how that in this there is a great contrast between God and his righteousness and Israel and their sinfulness. It's a constant back and forth of seeing that picture. And we're looking at the nature of what true confession looks like. It doesn't qualify itself. It doesn't make excuses. It simply owns behavior in a radical way. And Daniel is doing that with himself. He's doing that for his people because they have not done it. And so let's begin reading verse 3. It says, "Then I turned my face to the Lord God, seeking him by prayer and pleas for mercy. With fasting and sackcloth and ashes, I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments." That's Exodus 34, 6 and 7 he's citing. He says, "We have sinned and done wrong and acted wickedly and rebelled, turning aside from your commandments and rules. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings and our princes and our fathers and to all the people of the land. To you, O Lord, belongs righteousness, but to us open shame, as at this day the men of Judah to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to all Israel, those who are near and those who are far away in the lands to which you have driven them, because of the treachery that they have committed against you. To us, O Lord, belongs open shame, to our kings, to our princes, and to our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To the Lord our God belong mercy and forgiveness, for we have rebelled against him and have not obeyed the voice of the Lord our God by walking in his laws, which he set before us by his servants the prophets. All Israel has transgressed your law and turned aside and refused to obey your voice, and the curse and the oath that are written in the law of Moses, the servant of God." These curses are in Leviticus 26 and in Deuteronomy 28. "Have been poured out upon us because we have sinned against him. He has confirmed his words," that is, he kept his word. He has been faithful, "which he spoke against us and against our rulers who ruled us, by bringing upon us a great calamity. For under the whole heaven there has not been anything done. There's not been done anything like what has been done against Jerusalem." And when you look into the history of it, it is very, very grotesque. And then this is where we pick up. And he says, "As it is written in the law of Moses, all this calamity has come upon us. Yet we have not entreated the favor of the Lord our God, turning from our iniquities and gaining insight by your truth." There's the kicker. And that's what's leading him to this point. After all this, we still don't think it's our fault. We didn't gain insight. We learned nothing from the experience. Okay? And as a matter of fact, one of the prophets who has been preaching for many years along the same lines as Daniel is Ezekiel. And Ezekiel's job is to convince the people that they're in captivity because of their own sins. In Ezekiel 18, it opens up. He says, "This proverb is popular in Israel. The fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge." That is, the fathers ate bad food, and our teeth are the ones that are reaping the benefits. Our teeth are being destroyed based upon what our fathers ate. So you see, what's the implication? They did wrong. We have to suffer the consequences. We have done nothing wrong, and we're suffering consequences. And Ezekiel says, no, the soul that sins, it dies. You're in captivity because you sinned, because you chose to do it. Certainly your fathers did, but you are certainly here because you have chosen to sin and you have walked in their ways. So Ezekiel is a prophet that forces personal responsibility upon the people. He's going to get them to see that they are there because of what they have done, not trying to find excuses for why they are there and to somehow yet claim innocence. So, and it's something that we see, when we have kids and we're working through things and they're pleading their case. Yeah, I did, but he hit me first, and so I did. And what do we say to them? You got to own your own action. Okay? Nobody makes you do anything. Now, isn't it interesting that when we tell that to our children, but yet as adults, we can make the same arguments? Well, I wouldn't have done it if they wouldn't have looked at me that way, or they wouldn't have said something to me that way, or if they would have. How about I did it? I did it. And there's no excuse for it. Me owning my part in anything, even if the other person involved did something wrong, me owning my part does not give them a free pass that says they're innocent. It's just simply me saying, look, I contributed things to this, and I own that, period. And if I'm not willing to do that, why should I expect the other person to be willing to do that? Okay? So, it's about learning from experiences. And taking radical ownership, and then on top of that, learning from the experience. People say, and I'm not, I'm not going to get in word wars with people, semantic games. I don't. So some people say experience is the best teacher. I understand what they mean by that. And I don't have a problem with the statement as long as it is understood correctly. But experience doesn't necessarily teach you anything. Right? People do stuff and then they do something dumb, and then they do it again, and again, and again. Experience is not the best teacher. Evaluated experience is the best teacher. That is, when I look at an experience of something I did or didn't do well, and I learn from what I did, what led me into that problem, what led me into that mistake, and then I learn from that experience how to avoid it the next time around. In that case, experience is a great teacher. Because a lot of the things that I have learned, personally speaking, about preaching and the bad ways to do it are not from watching other people. They're from watching myself. Okay? You can learn from yourself. You can see monumentally bad mistakes if you're willing to look at them. And so it's not, it's kind of like learning to do stuff around your house. How did you learn how to do some of that stuff? Well, I learned it because I messed it up a few times. Okay? And so, evaluating the experience. And that's what Daniel is saying. That's where Daniel is confessing. He's saying, look, our sins, in my generation, that's our mistake. We have not owned our culpability. We have not owned our sinfulness, nor have we tried to learn from it. We simply, according to Ezekiel, just tried to shift the blame to somebody else. And it's never going to work. So, in verse 14, he says, this has been the consequence because we won't own our action. It says, therefore the Lord has kept ready the calamity that he has brought it upon us. The Lord our God is righteous in all the works that he has done, and we have not obeyed his voice. That's why things continue to go poorly for us, is because we have refused to learn. We've refused to own it. And so verse 15 he says, and now, O Lord our God, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand and have made a name for yourself, as at this day, we have sinned and done wickedly. And so Daniel is setting forward what he's already said, but he's making it very clear to God, we are wrong and we make no excuses. We have done it. Where we are is what we deserve. So, then he begins the portion of the confession where he begins to seek forgiveness. He gets more vocal on that side. He says, O Lord, according to all your righteous acts, let your anger and your wrath turn away from your city Jerusalem, from your holy hill, because of our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers. Jerusalem and your people have become a byword among all who are around us. Okay, now I want you to see this. He's seeking God's anger to turn away. He's seeking forgiveness from your city, Jerusalem. That was the city he had chosen. Deuteronomy 12 spoke of not Jerusalem, but when they went into the promised land, there would be a city that was chosen. And your holy hill, which is talking specifically about Jerusalem. You see it in Psalm 2:6. You see it in a lot of other places, Jerusalem referred to as a holy hill. He says, because of our sins and our iniquities of our fathers, Jerusalem and your people have become a byword among all that are around us. Here's the key that's going to come to the forefront. He is not saying, God, you should forgive us because we are asking. That's not what he says. His concern is about the glory of God's own name. Because it's your city, and we are your people, and we stand in a very negative point of view in the world right now. We are despised. We're a byword. We're a joke. And we're your people. How does that... Forgiving us is about you. We are more concerned with the reputation of your name than even we are of being forgiven. Okay? So think, it's a really challenging thought. That I'm more concerned with how my actions have reflected on God than I am as to what my actions would cost me. It's a really hard thought. What am I most concerned about? Am I most concerned that, oh no, I'm going to be lost? Or am I concerned with the fact that the way I behaved harmed God's reputation in the earth? Because that's what he's appealing to. Don't forgive us because we've earned it. You can't earn forgiveness. I mean, the word give is in the very word itself. It's a gift. So that's his appeal. Then he says, now therefore, O our God, listen to the prayer of your servant and to his pleas of mercy. And for your own sake, O Lord, make your face to shine upon your sanctuary, which is desolate. Okay, your sanctuary is talking about the temple, which of course is in ruins at this time. Make your face to shine upon it, that is... turn your face toward it, be gracious toward it, allow it to be rebuilt, all of the things that are in Ezra, the book of Ezra, that is. But again, do it for your own sake. Do it for your own sake. Not for us, but for you. We're not asking you to restore us to the land and to temple worship because we feel like we've earned it. We're asking you to do it so that your name would not be a byword and treated as such in all the earth. We have caused that, and we acknowledge that. This is confession. He says, "O my God, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see your desolations in the city that is called by your name. For we do not present our pleas before you because of our righteousness, but because of your great mercy." And again, it goes back to a couple of classes ago when Ryan was talking about Psalm 51. This is exactly what David does. The psalm opens, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your loving kindness. According to the multitude of your tender mercies, blot out my transgressions." David doesn't say, "Hey, have mercy on me because I'm a pretty good guy." David understood the only way I'm going to receive mercy is not because I'm good, but because God is. And that's what they're saying. I'm not presenting a plea to you because we're in captivity, for crying out loud. How well is that argument going to go? I'm a good person, so forgive me. It's not the way this works. So he says, "O Lord, hear. O Lord, give. O Lord, pay attention and act. Delay not," and this is again for the third time he says it, "for your own sake. O my God, because your city and your people are called by your name." Rebuild the city, restore the people, because our fortune is attached to you. Our wagon is hitched to you. And as long as we are held in shame, people will treat you the same. Restore us, not because we earn that, but because in doing so, you'll restore your own glory. So that's his prayer, his confession, the radical nature of it that we spent a lot of time talking about last week. So then we come to verse 20, and he says, "While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God for the holy hill of my God," talking about again Jerusalem, "while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in a vision at first," talking about coming back to chapter 8, when he appears to him to help him understand. So here is Gabriel, and says, "He came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice." Now, the evening sacrifice most likely has reference to, you remember in Exodus 29:39, I think. And if it's not 29:39, it's 39:29. But I think it's 29:39. Every day they were to offer a sacrifice in the morning and a sacrifice in the evening. That was a ritual action to maintain their fellowship with God. And so the evening sacrifice here, now obviously the temple is destroyed. They aren't making the sacrifices. But he still identifies the time as being what? Well, about the time when we would normally be offering the evening sacrifice, okay? So he says at about that time, which would have been, by the way, about 3 or 4 p.m. In the afternoon. It says, "He made me to understand, speaking with me and saying, 'O Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and I have come to tell you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision.'" So Gabriel appears to him and says, "I'm here to talk to you about this." God has specifically assigned me to come and speak to you and to help you understand something. And when I read that, my first tendency is to think, that's pretty special. He starts praying, God sends an angel directly to him. God gives him a direct answer. Except, first of all, that God hears us just as clearly and responds as well. Now, he's not going to respond in the form of an angel appearing to us to talk to us directly, but he still responds to us. And then it says, and as I'm reading it, I thought to myself, okay, Daniel, you're greatly loved. Okay, so I'm sitting here thinking, well, that's pretty solid, right? I mean, that'd be a pretty good experience. That would help me with some of my own insecurities if an angel comes in front of me and says, hey, you're loved by God. Except when you realize Daniel only had an angel who told him that. We've had God's own Son who told us that. So, this has to do, this prophecy that's become known as the 70 weeks, there are a lot of things here to kind of parse out. So, actually, hold on just a second, because I had a couple of questions from last week I did not get because Drew had my phone in Bible Bowl for the stuff. So let me answer a couple questions that were sent in last week. One is, did Israel ever blame God for their sins in captivity? Yes. Where? I don't know off the top of my head. But I know they, not just for captivity, but sins in period, okay, so Micah chapter 6. Micah 6, beginning in verse 6, the people say this, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings and calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams and with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression and the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? So what they're accusing God of is being impossible. That's what they're saying. How can I come before the Lord? He's so impossible. Would God be pleased if I gave him my firstborn as an offering? You see the implication that they're making? He's impossible to please, and then that leads to the prophet responding with what has become well known even into cultural Christianity. That is, no, you say God is impossible to please, but he's told you what is good and what the Lord your God requires of you, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with the Lord your God. That's it. Don't tell me God can't be pleased. He has shown you what he expects of you. And so that's one that I can think of off the top of my head, where they're trying to lay the blame at the feet of God. Then there was one other. When thinking about confession in James 5:19, how does one deal with the fear of individuals who abuse confessions, like the International Churches of Christ, who hold confessions over individuals who wanted to leave the church, putting individuals in hospitals? Yeah. Also happens a lot in Scientology and other places. And that is, my answer, first of all, would be that the confession that we're dealing with in Daniel 9 and the confession of specific sins, trying to seek help from certain leaders, they're two different worlds. Okay? How we handle confession amongst ourselves it's different. Okay? This is more of Daniel 9 is a national repentance. It's a national confession. You notice, though, that he does not give specific sins, right? He gives words that describe sins, iniquities, rebellions. But he does not actually mention a single sin they committed, okay? So if I'm confessing, how I would confess a sin publicly is probably going to be different than how I would confess a sin privately between me and God or with someone that I'm seeking help from. Okay? Publicly, why do people need to know all the details? what business is it of theirs? I've had some people try and tell me that they needed to know what the person had done so they could help them. And I wanted to say, you're doing good to get out of bed in the morning. You're not going to help them. All right? Like, what the person really wanted to know, they just wanted to know the gossip so they could pass it down the line. Okay? I don't need to know specifically what the sin is in order to pray for you. Now, if it's something that has consumed me, some kind of addiction or something along those lines, it's a little bit different story. And then we have to start being cautious, and we have to, there are laws and ethics in place for how we handle that, what we can talk about, what we cannot talk about, which is a good time to say, by the way, that not saying that anyone is asked, so that makes it really easy to say this. Even if I were counseling someone, you could not know that. And even if you asked me that, I would not answer it. That's not the kind of information you pass out. I don't disclose that information. My standard answer, whether I'm seeing the person or not, is this. I will say, I can't disclose that type of information, but if you have something you'd like to talk about, you're welcome to come. Anyway, I hope that answers in a general way what the question is. So public, a little bit different than when we're in private and we're seeking help. And then unfortunately there are some people that can abuse that privacy, but number one, they can go to jail for it and or be sued for it, and number two, they'll have a bigger problem with God on their hands for violating that kind of a trust. So, all right. Any other questions or anything? Okay. So let's read this 70 weeks prophecy and start trying to get our bearings with it a little bit. Okay, verse 24, 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. At the end and after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be a war. Desolations are decreed, and shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half a week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. All right. So, this is without a doubt the hardest of Daniel's words. Trying to understand what's going on. So, I not only want to try and interpret it, I want to, at the same time, kind of do what we did when we first got to Daniel 7, and that is, when I read a text that I don't understand, how should I go about trying to understand it? Okay? So, that's what we're going to try and do here. I'm going to try and walk you through some of those steps. And the reason is twofold. Number one, to get to the answer, or to get to some possibilities. I don't know that I have the answer on it. There are 2 of them that are pretty solid. And both of them have their weaknesses as well. But also to kind of show us how we think through things. Okay? So, let's begin here. The conundrums are early and often. Number 1, 70 weeks. Does anybody's translation read differently? There you go. What are you reading from? They're always honest. 77s, because that's actually what it says. That's the Hebrew phrase. It's not 70 weeks, it's 77s. Not the number 77, but 70 sevens. Okay? 70 sevens. So, what does this mean? How is it supposed to be understood? Are we even supposed to take the numbers literally? All of these questions that deal with the interpretation begin early. Okay? So let me kind of frame it for you. You remember, depending upon which translation you have, you'll have something along these lines. But in Matthew 18, you remember, they come to Jesus and they say, how often shall my... No, that's not how it starts, is it? How often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? And Jesus says, I don't say to you up to 7 times, but to... Some translations will say 77, and some will say 70 times 7. Is he being literal? No. It's not what he means. 70, even if the number is 77, or if it's 70 times 7, which would be 490, the point, he's using a hyperbole. It's an exaggeration to emphasize his point. As often as they legitimately seek forgiveness, forgive them. Okay. So 77s, what has led to, because I think most people's translations will read 70 weeks. So what led to that understanding? Okay. So it comes like this. The idea is that the 77s, so what has 7 in it? What has, I don't really know how to answer that. The idea is that there are 7 days in a week, 7s, all right? But here's where it gets even trickier. Because the most predominant understanding of it is, but this is not even talking about 70 times 7 weeks. They're saying it's 7 weeks of years. So they're equating this to 490 years. Now, I'm going to tell you straight up, I don't think that's right. And I understand that's the most popular interpretation, but I don't think it's right. Number one, because where in the world do you see that in the text? The reason why people want it to be 490 years is so they can fit a certain amount of chronology, which even when they try and do that, the chronology will not add up. Okay? So, whether it's 490 years, and let's say it is 490 years, I don't think this is meant to be taken as us literally calculating time. Start a clock here, end the clock here. I don't think that's what's meant here. That doesn't seem to be the way Daniel uses numbers. Apocalyptic books do not use numbers that way. Okay? So, what I think he's communicating is the same thing Jesus is communicating about forgiveness, and that is we're talking about a long period of time. Okay? The same thing when you get to Revelation 20. They lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Does he mean 1,000 literal years? Okay? Psalm 50. If I were hungry, I wouldn't ask you, because the cattle is mine on 1,000 hills. Is God saying I only own in all of the world 1,000 hills? He's saying they're all mine. So numbers are used not the same way that we use them. Okay? So I think that is the first thing to pay attention to. The second thing, and I know the bell is rung, but I'm just right at time right here. So the second thing that I want us to see is this. Okay, so you'll notice in verse 24 that there are a number of things, there are 6 things that are mentioned here, and they each begin with the word to. Okay? So the way it is used here, this has to do with kind of like mission statements. Like in Luke 19:10, when Jesus said, I came to seek and to save. Those are grammatical constructions telling you, when he puts the to in front of it, the way it's constructed, he's telling you this is my purpose. To seek, to save. Okay? So he says, 70 weeks are decreed about your people and the holy city to finish the transgression, 1, to put an end to sin, 2, to atone for iniquity, 3, to bring in everlasting righteousness, 4, to seal both vision and prophet, 5, and to anoint the most holy place, 6. Okay? So however we interpret the vision, it has to somehow revolve around those 6 things. Okay? And that's basically the first rule of interpreting a text you don't know. Find out what you do first. Find out what you can know first. And what I can know is these are 6 purpose statements. And they're directly connected somehow to whatever is going to follow. So we'll pick up there next week, and we should be able to work through it, I think, without a problem in one sitting.